welcome to a deep dive into something I think a lot of you out there are going to find pretty useful. We're going to be looking at family housing in Japan. Specifically, we'll be pulling from this article, Finding Family Housing in Japan, a comprehensive guide for expats from Expats Notes, published pretty recently, actually, just January 22nd of this year. So, all this information should be really up to date, which is great. And what we're going to do in this deep dive is really try and pull out all the good stuff about, what you'd want to know if you were moving to Japan with a family. So first things first, right? You're probably picturing Tokyo, those really, those busy streets, Osaka maybe. And yeah, those places definitely exist. But what this article really gets into is the fact that there's just not a ton of space, especially in those cities. Like, think about it this way. In Tokyo, the average size of an apartment is about half of what you'd find in a typical American city. So, you're really looking at compact living. That's what they call it in the article, at least. And honestly, that's probably the first thing you need to wrap your head around, is that things are going to be a bit smaller. But doesn't mean they're not comfortable. The article goes into this a little bit. The way apartments are designed in Japan is kind of interesting. A lot of them have this open plan concept, which basically means the kitchen and living areas, sometimes even the bedrooms, they all kind of flow into each other. It's not like a typical American house, with lots of walls and separate rooms. And honestly, this can be a good thing, especially for families. It creates a sense of togetherness, Everyone's kind of in the same space. So, yeah, apartments are definitely an option. Those are what they call mansions in Japan, kind of funny. But the article also mentions detached houses. Obviously, those give you a lot more space and privacy, but they're not exactly common, especially in the cities. Like, less than 10% of the housing in Tokyo is detached houses. And with that, comes a higher price tag. So unless you've got a really great relocation package, you're probably going to be looking at an apartment. Now, one other option they mentioned is corporate housing. If your company offers that, that can be a really good way to start, because it takes a lot of the stress out of finding a place and often includes utilities and stuff, which is nice. But realistically, for most families moving to Japan, it's probably going to be a mansion. Sure. All right, so we've talked about the types of housing a little bit, but the next big question is location, right? And this is where it gets really personal, because you've got to think about your family and your lifestyle. Are you the kind of family that thrives in the middle of all the action? Or are you looking for something a little more laid back, maybe in the suburbs? The article goes into some different areas. And instead of just listing them all out, I thought it'd be helpful to kind of categorize them a bit. So for the city lovers out there, the article mentions Setagaya in Tokyo. It's got this kind of relaxed vibe, lots of trees, almost like a little village right in the middle of the city. If you're looking for something a little more hip, maybe Kichijoji is another good option. That's in Tokyo as well. Lots of boutiques, cafes, that kind of thing. And then if you're all about green spaces and a strong international community, Denin Chofu, also in Tokyo, or Suta in Osaka. Those could be worth checking out. They all have a different flavor, so it really depends what your family's into. Now, if you're thinking more along the lines of more space, slower pace, maybe a lower cost of living, the article suggests checking out some of the suburban areas, like Yokohama and Chiba. Those are both still within commuting distance to the major cities, but they offer a bit more breathing room, kind of the best of both worlds. Okay, so we've talked about types of housing, we've talked about locations. Now comes the fun part, the Japanese rental system. This is where things can get a little interesting. The article really stresses that you need to be prepared for a pretty big financial commitment up front, and it can be a bit of a shock if you're not expecting it. So have you ever heard of key money? Of course, it's this thing in Japan where you basically give the landlord a non-refundable payment, kind of like a thank you for letting you rent their property. And it can be a lot, like 1 or 2 months rent sometimes.
I don't know, it sounds weird, but it's just how things are done there. On top of the key money, you've also got the usual deposit, which they call shikikin in Japanese. That one is refundable, thankfully. And then you've got agent fees, which are usually another month's rent. So before you even move in, you could be looking at 4 or 5 months rent up front. Definitely something to budget for early on. And then, of course, there's the actual monthly rent itself. The article gives some average ranges, but the main thing to remember is that prices are all over the place. It really depends on where you are and how big of a place you need. For example, in Tokyo, for a decent-sized apartment for a family, you're probably looking at anywhere from $150,000 to $300,000 per month. But if you're in a smaller city like Fukuoka, you might be able to find something similar for like $80,000 to $150,000. So big difference there. I know this is a lot of numbers and it can be kind of overwhelming, but I think the article does a good job of breaking it all down. What are your initial thoughts on all this? Anything standing out to you so far? Any concerns about the financial side of things?
Okay, so yeah, all those numbers and all the different terms, it can be kind of confusing, right? And that's exactly why the article says, get a good bilingual real estate agent. Like seriously, they're worth every penny when it comes to navigating the Japanese rental system. They can help you understand all that legal stuff, the contracts, they can negotiate with landlords for you. And most importantly, I think they can help you find places that actually fit your family's needs. Speaking of needs, let's talk about what you should be looking for in a Japanese family home. The article really emphasizes kid-friendly features, which makes sense, right? I mean, no matter where you live, you want your kids to be happy and comfortable. So things like being close to parks and playgrounds, being near good schools, those are important anywhere, but especially in Japan where they really value community harmony and all that. So yeah, you got to think about those things. And then inside the apartment building itself, are there elevators? Is there a secure entrance? Oh, this is a big one. Good noise insulation. Because let's face it, kids can be noisy. And in Japan, it's really important to be mindful of your neighbors. Like that's a big part of their culture. Safety is obviously a big deal too. And the article mentions a few things to look for in that regard. Earthquake-resistant construction, that's kind of a given in Japan. But also things like window locks, secure balconies, stuff to make sure your kids are safe. And it's not just about like protecting your own family. It's also about respecting the community and those shared values. Speaking of blending in, fitting into the community, the article had this really interesting point about Japanese etiquette. It encourages expats to really
Let's unpack
try and
it.
understand the
Yeah.
customs
What it
there,
means for
even
you.
small things
App.
like, taking your shoes off indoors or being really careful about noise levels, especially in those apartment buildings. It's all about, showing respect for your neighbors,
Yeah.
building those relationships. So yeah, I thought that was a really good point. I know moving to a new country, especially one like Japan, it can be kind of intimidating. But remember, the whole point of this deep dive is to give you the information you need to feel confident about this whole process. And the article does a good job of acknowledging some of the challenges expats might face and then offering solutions. For example, the language barrier. That can be tough, especially when you're dealing with like rental contracts and all that legal stuff. But the article suggests, using your bilingual agent to help you with that, or even reaching out to your employer. A lot of companies actually offer support services to their expat employees, so don't be afraid to ask for help. Another potential hurdle the article talks about is pet policies. A lot of apartments in Japan have really strict rules about pets. So if you're planning to bring your furry friend along, you're going to have to be extra careful about finding a place that allows them. Specifically, look for listings that say pet friendly. And then, of course, there's the whole space issue. Remember how we talked about those compact living spaces? Well, the article actually encourages you to see this as a positive thing, like as a chance to get creative with your living space. Think about multifunctional furniture, clever storage solutions. You could even rent an external storage unit if you really need to. It's an opportunity to embrace a more minimalist lifestyle, which can be really freeing, Oh, and speaking of helpful resources, too, the article mentions a couple of websites that are really useful for expats. Gaijinpot and Sumo. Those are great places to start your housing search and get all kinds of information specific to expats. And don't forget about local resources, too, like your ward office or the International Center. They can offer a lot of support to foreign residents, including help with finding housing. So there you have it. We've gone pretty deep into the world of family housing in Japan, pulled out all the good stuff from the Expats Notes article. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I will leave you something to think about. As you're picturing your family in your new home in Japan, what aspect of Japanese family life are you most excited about? As a community, the emphasis on tradition, or maybe their unique approach to raising kids. Whatever it is, hold on to that excitement. Let it guide you as you explore your options and embark on this incredible adventure. I know it can seem kind of overwhelming at first, all this stuff about finding a place in Japan. But honestly, if you take your time, you do your research, and you find those good resources, like a good agent, that's definitely doable. And the rewards are huge. You get to experience a whole new culture with your family, make some amazing memories. Who knows, maybe even discover something new about yourselves along the way. So in this deep dive, we really wanted to give you the tools to make this transition as easy as possible. We talk about all those unique things about Japanese housing, like the whole compact living thing, the upfront costs, different neighborhoods, whether you're more of a city person or a suburban person, and also practical tips for actually making it happen, finding an agent, understanding the cultural stuff, all that. So as you start this exciting journey, remember to stay curious, be open to new experiences, and most importantly, have fun. Happy house hunting, everyone. And here's to your family writing a brand new chapter in Japan.